Influence, new and expanded. User, Influence, new and expanded, by Robert B. Cialdini, Ph.D. Chapter 1, Levers of Influence, Power Tools of the Trades. Civilization progresses in a very specific way, by enabling us to do more and more without having to think about it deliberately. Think about driving a car on a familiar road. You can have entire conversations, listen to podcasts, or plan your day, all while your hands and feet execute the complex mechanics of operating a vehicle. Your mind is freed up for other things. This efficiency is a hallmark of human progress, but it also opens a door. Robert Cialdini opens this exploration with a series of peculiar findings on human behavior. Consider a study where volunteers were given a new, supposedly mind-enhancing drink. They were then asked to solve a series of puzzles. Here's the twist. One group was told they paid full price for the drink, while another group was told they got a steep discount. The results were striking. The group that paid less performed worse on the puzzles. The mere thought that something was cheap, a discount item, seemed to diminish its effectiveness in their minds, even though the drink was identical in both groups. This counterintuitive result is a perfect mirror of a classic story from the world of retail. A jewelry store owner was having trouble selling a line of turquoise jewelry. It was peak tourist season, the store was busy, but the items just sat there. She tried various tactics to move them, but nothing worked. Finally, late one night, frustrated and exhausted, she scribbled a note to her head saleswoman.
Everything in this case, price times 1/2.
Her intention was to clear them out at half price. When she returned to the store the next day, she wasn't surprised to see the case was empty, but she was horrified to learn that the saleswoman had misread her nearly illegible note. She had multiplied the price by 2, not cut it in half, and yet every single piece had sold. The customers, largely wealthy and unfamiliar with turquoise, had used a simple mental rule: expensive equals good. The high price had become a trigger feature for quality. This brings us to the animal world and the concept of fixed action patterns. Consider the mother turkey. She is a wonderful, caring mother, but much of her maternal behavior is triggered by a single thing: the cheep, cheep sound of her chicks. If a chick makes that sound, she will care for it. If it doesn't, she will ignore or even kill it. In a famous experiment, a researcher presented a mother turkey with a stuffed polecat, which is a natural enemy. The turkey attacked it viciously, but when the researcher placed a small recorder inside the polecat that played the cheep, cheep sound, the mother turkey not only stopped attacking, she pulled the stuffed enemy under her wing and tried to mother it. The sound alone, the trigger feature, overrode every other instinct and piece of information. Humans have their own version of this, which Cialdini calls the click-run phenomenon. Psychologist Ellen Langer demonstrated this beautifully. She approached people waiting in line to use a university copy machine and asked to cut in front of them. She framed her request in 3 different ways. The first was simple.
"Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine?"
The compliance rate was about 60%. The second way added a reason.
"Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I'm in a rush?"
This boosted compliance to 94%. The third way was the key. She said,
"Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I have to make some copies?"
The reason was meaningless. It gave no new information. Everyone in line was there to make copies. Yet, the compliance rate remained at 93%. The word "because," a simple trigger, had flipped a switch in the minds of the people waiting, leading to automatic compliance. These automatic responses are guided by what psychologists call judgmental heuristics. These are mental shortcuts, rules of thumb that simplify our incredibly complex world. The expensive equals good heuristic is one. We assume that a higher price signals higher quality, and most of the time it's a safe assumption. But as the turquoise story shows, it can lead to irrational choices. We have many such heuristics. If an expert said so, it must be true. If many people are doing it, it must be right. These shortcuts are efficient, but they expose us to manipulation. The role of social proof is a powerful example. In the modern world, we look to online reviews to guide our choices. But these can be easily faked. A restaurant owner can pay for positive reviews, and suddenly people are lining up, their behavior triggered by the false evidence of others' opinions. This is not unlike the mimicry in the animal world, where one creature exploits the automatic patterns of another for its own gain. Profiteers are those who understand these levers and use them to manipulate. They are the compliance professionals who know which buttons to push. One of their favorite tools is the contrast principle. This principle affects how we perceive the difference between two things presented one after another. If you lift a light object first, and then a heavy object, the heavy object will feel heavier than if you had lifted it alone. If you first look at an expensive suit, a moderately priced sweater will now look cheap by comparison. Car salespeople use this masterfully. They will first close a deal on a high-priced car, and only then, when the numbers are being written up, will they start suggesting the extras, the floor mats, the rust-proofing, the extended warranty. Compared to the thousands already committed, these few $100s seem like a drop in the bucket. So, what is the conclusion? Our automatic, shortcut-driven behaviors are essential. They make modern life possible. But they also render us vulnerable. The same mechanisms that allow a mother turkey to be an efficient parent can be hijacked by a stuffed polecat with a tape recorder. Understanding these mechanisms, these levers of influence, is not just an academic exercise. It is crucial for self-protection. By knowing how the click-run response works, we can begin to recognize when it is being triggered in us, and we can decide whether to let the tape play or to stop and think. Chapter 2. Reciprocation, the old give and take. There is a rule, deeply embedded in every human culture, that compels us to repay what we have received from another. This is the rule of reciprocation. It is a simple, almost primitive force. You owe me, because I gave to you first. Its power is immense, and its reach is universal. A university professor decided to test this rule in a very simple way. He sent out a holiday card, not to friends or family, but to a list of complete strangers, people he had never met. What happened? A flood of holiday cards came back to him. Most of these people did not ask who he was. They simply received a card, felt the tug of obligation, and sent one back. They were participating in the old give and take without a moment's thought. The power of reciprocation has been proven in countless experiments. In the United Kingdom, charity fundraisers discovered that if they approached people on the street and simply asked for a donation, they had a certain rate of success. But if they first gave the person a small, unexpected gift, like a piece of candy or a flower, the likelihood of receiving a donation skyrocketed. The gift, no matter how small, created an obligation. The person now felt they owed something in return. This rule is not a recent invention. It is fundamental to human cooperation and the very evolution of society. Cultural anthropologists argue that this web of indebtedness is what allowed our ancestors to thrive. It enabled the sharing of food, the division of labor, and the creation of mutual dependencies that formed the bedrock of communities. We are human in part because our ancestors learned to participate in an honored network of obligation. A gift created a future claim. A favor created a future debt. This system allowed societies to grow and prosper. The obligations created by reciprocation can be surprisingly durable, lasting across decades and even generations. In 1985, a massive earthquake devastated Mexico City. Around the world, nations rushed to send aid. Among them was a small, surprising donation of $5,000 from the war-torn and famine-stricken country of Ethiopia. This seemed bizarre. Why would a nation in such desperate need send money to another? It turned out that 50 years earlier, in 1935, when Ethiopia was invaded by Italy, Mexico was one of the only nations to come to its aid and speak out against the invasion. The government of Ethiopia, remembering this, felt an obligation that had not faded in half a century. They were compelled to repay the favor. In everyday life, we see the dynamics of this rule constantly. Consider an employee who feels a deep sense of gratitude towards a manager who helped them through a personal crisis or gave them a generous bonus when they least expected it. Even when a better job offer comes along, that employee may feel bound to stay, not out of logic, but out of a profound sense of obligation. Or think of a college student whose car breaks down on a lonely highway. A stranger stops, spends hours helping, and refuses to take any money. The student and his entire family may then spend years looking for ways to repay that kindness, an obligation that feels like a debt of honor. Psychologist Dennis Reagan designed a brilliant experiment to isolate the power of reciprocation. Two subjects, one of whom was a confederate of the experimenter, were asked to rate paintings. During a short break, the confederate left the room and returned with 2 bottles of Coca-Cola. He gave one to the real subject, saying,
"I asked him if he could buy one, and he said sure, so I got one for you too."
This was a small, unsolicited favor. After the ratings were finished, the confederate made a much larger request. He explained he was selling raffle tickets for a new car and asked the subject to buy some at 25 cents a ticket. The subjects who had been given a Coke bought twice as many tickets as those who had not. The rule of reciprocation was so strong that it even overrode personal liking. In a variation of the experiment, the confederate acted in an unlikable way, yet subjects who had received the Coke still bought tickets from him. The obligation to reciprocate the favor trumped their personal feelings about the person. Businesses have mastered the application of this rule. The free sample is a classic tactic. It is a gift, and it carries with it the urge to reciprocate by buying the product. The Hare Krishna Society used this for decades. Their members would approach people in airports, press a flower into their hand, and only then ask for a donation. The flower was not a gift, it was a psychological lever. Another powerful application is the rejection then retreat technique. This involves making a large, unreasonable request that you know will be refused. After the refusal, you retreat to a smaller, more reasonable request, the one you actually wanted all along. The other person sees this as a concession on your part, and their internal rule of reciprocation demands that they make a concession in return, which is to agree to the smaller request. This is the basis of many negotiations, from car buying to international diplomacy. How do you defend against exploitation of this powerful rule? The key is not to reject all favors and gifts. To do so would be to cut yourself off from genuine social connection. Instead, accept the gift or favor in good faith, but if later you come to recognize that the initial gesture was not a genuine gift, but a compliance tactic designed to pressure you, you can redefine it. You can say to yourself, "I accepted this gift knowing it was a sales tool, not a genuine act of kindness. I am therefore under no obligation to reciprocate." By recognizing the ploy, you free yourself from its psychological hold. Chapter 3. Liking, the friendly thief. It is one of the simplest truths of human interaction. People prefer to say yes to individuals they like. This principle, the liking rule, is so pervasive and powerful that it shapes decisions from the trivial to the profound, and it can be exploited by what Cialdini calls the friendly thief. The power of liking can even influence deeply held beliefs, such as those surrounding science and religion. For years, science communicators have struggled to persuade people to accept the theory of evolution. They have used logic, presented fossil evidence, and explained natural selection in painstaking detail. Yet, for many, the message does not stick. Why? Because for a significant portion of the population, belief in creationism is not a matter of logic. It is a matter of emotional and faith-based identity, reinforced by their community. You cannot reason someone out of a position they were never reasoned into. But studies show that attitudes can shift when the message comes from a likable source. Researchers found that when participants were shown that a well-liked celebrity, such as George Clooney or Emma Watson, supported or expressed openness to evolutionary concepts, their own acceptance of the theory increased, regardless of their religious background or political affiliation. The positive feelings for the person transferred to the idea itself. In personal interactions, the liking rule is equally potent. A top medical malpractice attorney, Alice Birkin, noted a fascinating pattern in her practice. She said,
People just don't sue doctors they like.
in her experience, the technical merits of the case mattered less than the patient's personal feelings toward the physician. If the patient felt a genuine connection, they were far more likely to forgive an error and seek to resolve the issue outside of court. The commercial world exploits this rule without mercy. The Tupperware party is a perfect example. The party is not hosted by a professional salesperson. It is hosted by a friend. The guests are not just customers, they are friends of the host. When it comes time to make a purchase, the request is not coming from a distant corporation. It is coming from a person they know and like. The social bond is the primary driver of the sale. Research has shown that the strength of that social bond is twice as likely to determine a purchase as the customer's actual preference for the product. Charities use the same tactic. They don't just mail out requests. They ask you to ask your friends. They know that you are far more likely to recruit volunteers and donors from your own social circle than a stranger ever could be. But what makes one person like another? Several factors are at play. Physical attractiveness is a major one. It triggers a halo effect. We automatically assume that good-looking people are also more kind, intelligent, and trustworthy. We are simply more likely to comply with a request from an attractive person. Similarity is another powerful factor. We like people who are like us. This can be similarity in opinions, personality traits, background, or even lifestyle. Compliance professionals often create an illusion of similarity to build rapport. They might mirror your posture, match your language, or mention that they share your hobby. Praise and compliments generate affection, even when the praise is not entirely genuine. We are suckers for flattery. And finally, we are influenced by association. We like things that are connected to positive things. This is why advertisers spend millions to pair their products with beautiful models, popular music, or happy scenes. The good feelings from the music or the model rub off on the product. To defend against the friendly thief, the strategy is to concentrate on the request, not the requester. When you find yourself feeling an unusual amount of liking for a person who is trying to persuade you, especially someone you've just met, you should mentally separate that person from their proposal. Ask yourself, am I liking this person genuinely, or are they employing tactics like similarity, flattery, and association to manufacture that feeling? Once you identify the tactic, you can move your focus back to the merits of the deal itself. Chapter 4. Social Proof. Truths are us. The principle of social proof is remarkably simple. We determine what is correct by finding out what other people think is correct. We view a behavior as more correct in a given situation to the degree that we see others performing it. The actions of those around us are a powerful guide, a mental shortcut that tells us what to do. The evidence for this is everywhere. In a restaurant in Beijing, the management ran an experiment. They created a list of the most popular dishes, simply labeling them as such. The result? Those labeled items saw a 13 to 20% increase in sales. In a London pub, a similar experiment with most popular wines led to a significant sales jump. At McDonald's, when they began highlighting popular items on their digital menu boards, sales of those items increased by nearly 900%. Netflix, for years, kept its viewership data secret. When they finally started sharing which shows were the most popular, they found that informing customers of this social proof not only increased viewership, but also increased viewer satisfaction. People enjoyed the shows more, knowing that others were enjoying them too. We use social proof as a shortcut to good decisions. It is usually efficient to follow the crowd, but this shortcut becomes dangerous when the evidence is false or manipulated. Fake online reviews, planted actors, and staged, spontaneous crowds are all designed to hijack this principle. Social proof is most powerful in two specific situations. The first is uncertainty. When we are unsure of ourselves, when the situation is ambiguous, we are most likely to look to others for guidance. The second is similarity. We are most influenced by the actions of people we perceive as similar to ourselves. The dangers of uncertainty are chillingly illustrated by the bystander effect. In a famous case, a young woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked and murdered in New York City. It was later reported that 38 witnesses watched from their windows and did nothing. How could this be? The answer is not apathy, but pluralistic ignorance. In an ambiguous situation, everyone looked around to see how others were reacting. And because everyone else was also looking around and seeing no one acting, they all concluded that there was no emergency. They used the inaction of others as social proof that action was not required. The tragedy was a direct result of the principle of social proof. The power of similarity is demonstrated by the Werther effect. Following highly publicized reports of suicide, data shows a temporary increase in suicide rates, particularly in the geographic area where the original suicide occurred. The increase is most pronounced among people similar in age and gender to the person in the news. They see the act of a similar other as a model for their own behavior in a time of despair. The horrific events in Jonestown, Guyana, represent an extreme case. Over 900 members of the People's Temple died in a mass murder-suicide at the command of their leader, Jim Jones. While Jones's authority was absolute, the compliance of the group was reinforced by social proof. People looked around and saw their family, friends, and neighbors drinking the cyanide-laced punch. If everyone else was doing it, it must be the correct, or at least the unavoidable, thing to do. A critical mistake is often made by public service communicators. When trying to discourage a negative behavior, they often highlight its prevalence. They might say, "Thousands of teens are binge drinking," or "recycling rates are still low." But by doing this, they are inadvertently using social proof to reinforce the very behavior they want to stop. The message tells teens that binge drinking is something that many of their peers are doing, which can actually make it seem more normal and desirable. A more effective approach is to highlight a trend towards a desirable behavior. Saying, "More and more teens are choosing to stay sober," uses social proof for good. To defend against faulty social proof, we must be vigilant. Be aware of manipulated evidence. Recognize that the most popular list online might be paid for. In situations of uncertainty, it is wise to look beyond the crowd. Don't assume inaction is correct just because others are not acting. In an ambiguous situation, the crowd might be just as confused as you are. Your own independent judgment is a crucial counterbalance. Chapter 5. Authority, Directed Deference. From the moment we are born, we are conditioned to obey authority. Parents, teachers, bosses, and experts all guide our behavior. This deference is usually adaptive. It simplifies life and often leads to correct decisions. But the impulse to obey can become automatic and dangerous, leading us to comply with requests that are foolish or even evil. The most famous and chilling demonstration of this is the series of experiments conducted by Stanley Milgram at Yale University. A volunteer was brought into a lab and introduced to another participant, a mild-mannered man who was actually an actor. The experiment was supposedly about the effect of punishment on learning. The volunteer was assigned the role of teacher, and the actor the role of learner. The teacher watched as the learner was strapped into a chair with electrodes. The teacher was then led to another room and seated before a shock generator. This machine had a series of switches ranging from 15 volts, labeled slight shock, all the way up to 450 volts, ominously marked XXX. The teacher's job was to read a list of word pairs and then test the learner. For every wrong answer, the teacher was instructed by the experimenter, a stern man in a lab coat, to administer an electric shock. With each wrong answer, the shock level increased. The learner, of course, was not actually being shocked, but he was a brilliant actor. At 75 volts, he began to grunt. At 150 volts, he cried out in pain and demanded to be released. At 285 volts, he let out an agonized scream. Then, after 315 volts, he fell silent. The teacher could hear all of this. Many would turn to the experimenter, distressed, asking if they should continue. The experimenter had a set of prods.
Please continue.
he would say.
The experiment requires that you continue.
And finally,
You have no choice. You must go on.
what percentage of people do you think would administer a potentially lethal 450-volt shock to a screaming silent man? When Milgram asked psychiatrists, they predicted that only about 1% of the population would do so. The actual result was that nearly 2/3 of the participants, ordinary, everyday people, went all the way to the end. They were not monsters. They were simply obeying authority. Milgram concluded that this was the chief finding of his study, the extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority. The participants showed extreme distress. They sweated, they trembled, they pleaded with the learner to answer correctly. But they continued. They were caught in a conflict between their own moral principles and their deep-seated obligation to obey. This blind obedience is not confined to a psychology lab. In real life, it can have tragic consequences. Consider the case of S. Brian Wilson, a Vietnam War veteran who was protesting a naval weapons shipment by sitting on the train tracks. The train operator saw him. He could have stopped, but he had been ordered by his superiors to proceed and to sound the horn. He followed his orders, and the train severed both of Wilson's legs. He later said he was just following orders. In the medical field, this phenomenon is sometimes called captainitis. A doctor, the captain of the medical team, gives an order. A nurse, trained to defer, follows it without question, even when a fatal error is obvious. Studies have shown that in a significant number of medical errors, the mistake could have been prevented if a nurse or subordinate had felt empowered to question the doctor's authority. The deference to authority overrides common sense and professional judgment. How do we recognize authority so easily? We often rely on symbols of authority, rather than the substance of it. There are 3 primary symbols: titles, clothing, and trappings. A title, like doctor or professor, conveys status and expertise, even if the person is not an expert in the relevant field. Studies have shown that a person introduced as a doctor will be rated as taller by others. Clothing, such as a uniform or a business suit, signals authority. In one study, a man dressed in a security guard uniform was able to get people to obey a bizarre and illegal request, to pick up a paper bag and hand it to a stranger, far more often than when he was dressed in casual clothes. Trappings like expensive cars or jewelry also work. People are far more hesitant to cut off a driver in a new luxury car than an old, beat-up one. For an authority to be truly credible, they must have 2 qualities: expertise and trustworthiness. An expert who is known to be biased or untruthful loses their influence. Interestingly, a small confession of a minor weakness can actually enhance trustworthiness. By admitting a small flaw up front, the communicator appears more honest, making their subsequent, stronger claims more believable. To defend against the undue influence of authority, we must train ourselves to ask 2 critical questions. First, is this authority truly an expert? We need to determine if their claimed expertise is relevant to the situation at hand. Second, how truthful can we expect this expert to be? Are they likely to be biased in favor of their own position? By asking these questions, we shift from automatic deference to thoughtful evaluation, allowing us to follow legitimate authority while protecting ourselves from those who would exploit our deep-seated respect for it. Chapter 6. Scarcity, the rule of the few. The principle of scarcity is elegantly simple. Opportunities seem more valuable to us when their availability is limited. The fewer there are, the more we want them. This rule influences our behavior in countless ways, from our daily purchases to our most important life decisions. Consider the work of Sandy, a top divorce attorney. She often found herself in deadlocked negotiations, where neither party could agree on the final terms. Her breakthrough strategy was simple but powerful. Instead of framing a proposal around what her client or the other party would gain, she reframed it around what they would lose if they didn't agree. She would say,
"If we don't agree to these terms, you will lose the right to."
or,
"By failing to settle now, you risk losing."
by highlighting what was at stake and emphasizing the scarcity of the opportunity to settle, she was able to break through countless stalemates. She was tapping into the psychological principle of loss aversion. Loss aversion is the engine behind the scarcity principle. Research has consistently shown that the pain of losing something is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the same thing. We are more motivated by the thought of losing something we value than by the thought of acquiring something of equal value. This is why a manager will work harder to avoid a loss than to achieve a gain, and why a consumer will switch energy providers to avoid losing a rebate more readily than to gain one. A vivid example comes from Florida State University. Students were asked to rate the quality of the food in the campus cafeteria. Their ratings were unremarkable. Then, a fire in the kitchen forced the cafeteria to close for 2 weeks. When the students were asked again, their ratings of the cafeteria food shot up dramatically. Nothing about the food had changed, except that it was temporarily unavailable. The scarcity of it, and the thought of losing it, had made it seem far more desirable. This principle is everywhere. Collectors know that a rare stamp or coin is worth far more than a common one. Retailers use scarcity tactics constantly with phrases like limited edition, while supplies last, and one per customer. These phrases are designed to trigger an immediate desire for the product. But scarcity is not just about numbers. It is also about time. Limited time offers and deadlines create a sense of urgency. The thought of missing out, of losing the opportunity, propels us to act. This is the basis of doorbuster sales and the ubiquitous countdown timers on e-commerce sites. A fascinating aspect of scarcity is the role of new scarcity. We value things that have become scarce more than things that have always been scarce. A cookie that was once plentiful and then became rare is valued more highly than a cookie that was rare from the start. The feeling of loss is more acute when we are losing something we once had. The scarcity principle is also tied to psychological reactance. This theory, developed by psychologist Jack Brame, states that whenever our freedom to have something is limited or threatened, the need to retain our freedoms makes us want it significantly more than before. This is why forbidden fruit is so appealing. It is why a teenager will rebel against strict parents and want to do the very things they are forbidden from doing. The same principle applies to adults. When a product is banned or censored, we suddenly want it more. When information is classified as secret, it becomes more intriguing. In the social and political realm, scarcity can be a powerful driver of change. Revolutions are most likely to occur not when conditions are at their worst, but after a period of improvement, followed by a sudden and sharp reversal. People's freedoms have been expanded, and then those freedoms are threatened with being taken away. The psychological reactance created by this threat of loss fuels the desire to reclaim them. How do we defend ourselves against the scarcity pressure? The key is to recognize the arousal. Scarcity creates a kind of emotional rush. We feel excited, anxious, and eager to possess the scarce item. The first step is to be aware of this feeling. Then, we must ask ourselves a crucial question. Why do we want this thing? If the answer is simply, because it's scarce, or because I might lose it, then we are being influenced by the principle itself. The second and more important step is to separate the desire for the thing from the thing's actual utility. We must remind ourselves that a cookie tastes the same, whether it is plentiful or rare. A piece of jewelry functions the same way whether it is a limited edition or not. By focusing on the true value of the item for us, and not on its scarcity, we can make a rational decision, free from the emotional fog created by the rule of the few. Chapter 7. Commitment and Consistency, Hobgoblins of the Mind. The desire to be and to appear consistent is a powerful motivator of human behavior. Once we have made a choice or taken a stand, we encounter personal and interpersonal pressures to behave consistently with that commitment. We will think and act in ways that justify our earlier decision. This is the principle of commitment and consistency. Consider Amazon's pay-to-quit program. Once a year, the company offers its fulfillment center employees a cash bonus to leave. The offer starts small and increases each year, maxing out at $5,000. The message to employees is clear. We only want people working at Amazon who want to be here. Why would a company pay people to quit? The psychological logic is brilliant. An employee who considers the offer and decides to stay has made a powerful, voluntary choice. They have looked at a pile of cash and said,
"No, I choose to be here."
this act of commitment strengthens their internal resolve and their loyalty to the company. They are now more likely to be a committed, productive worker because they have publicly and actively chosen to be one. This principle is deeply embedded within us. Psychologists have long explored how it works. In one study, researchers posing as beachgoers would leave a radio on a blanket and walk away. A second researcher, acting as a thief, would come by and snatch the radio. When the scenario was run normally, very few people intervened to stop the theft. But in the second condition, the first researcher would first ask the nearby sunbather.
Excuse me, would you please watch my things?
The sunbather would agree, making a simple, small commitment. Then the thief would appear. In this scenario, a huge majority of the sunbathers jumped up and actively intervened. The small verbal commitment, "Sure, I'll watch your stuff," activated the consistency principle. They had committed to a course of action, and they felt compelled to be consistent with that commitment, even when it meant confronting a thief. This is the basis of the foot-in-the-door technique. Compliance professionals know that if they can get you to agree to a small, easy request, they have set the stage for you to agree to a much larger one. You want to be consistent with your own actions. Charity organizations use this when they ask you to sign a petition, knowing that you are then far more likely to make a donation. The power of a commitment is magnified when it is active, public, effortful, and seen as internally motivated. A commitment written down is stronger than one just spoken. A commitment made in front of others is stronger than a private one. A commitment that required effort to achieve, like an initiation or a difficult task, is particularly strong because it requires self-justification. The person who goes through a painful initiation to join a group will later convince themselves that the group must be wonderful to have been worth the pain. The Chinese, during the Korean War, used this principle masterfully with prisoners of war. They didn't use torture. Instead, they used a program of mild indoctrination. They would ask prisoners to write down very small, trivial statements that were favorable to the communist cause.
The United States is not perfect.
A prisoner might write. Over time, they would ask for more, always building on the previous commitment. The prisoners, to remain consistent with their own words and actions, slowly began to internalize the very ideas they were being asked to support. The danger of this principle is that it can lead us into a consistency trap. We may find ourselves blindly following a path laid down by a past decision, even when that path no longer serves us. We may justify a bad purchase, a poor relationship, or a failing strategy simply because we have already committed to it. As the writer James Joyce noted,
"I am today what I established yesterday, or some previous day."
to defend against manipulative commitment tactics, we must learn to listen to two internal signals. The first comes from our gut. When we feel a sense of pressure, a tightening in the stomach, that is a signal that we are being pushed to comply. The second comes from the heart of hearts. This is the voice that asks, knowing what I know now, would I make the same choice again? If the answer is no, then we have the power to change our minds. We can break the chain of consistency. It is not weakness to change. It is wisdom to recognize a poor commitment and to choose a better path. The ultimate goal is not to avoid consistency, which is a valuable trait, but to ensure that our consistency is directed toward commitments that are truly in our own best interest. Chapter 8. Unity. The we is the shared me. For decades, the study of influence focused on factors that connected people: liking, reciprocity, social proof. But Robert Cialdini, in this new and expanded edition, introduces a principle that transcends them all. It is a principle rooted not in mere similarity, but in shared identity. This is the principle of unity. This sense of unity is activated. The distinction between self and other begins to blur. The success of a fellow group member feels like our own success. Their humiliation feels like our own shame. And their requests become incredibly difficult to refuse, because refusing them would feel like refusing a part of ourselves. This principle is ancient and deeply biological. It is rooted in our tribal past, where survival depended on the group. Our ancestors lived in small bands where everyone was kin, or at least treated as such. The bond of the group was the bond of life and death. Today, that same psychological machinery is still operating, even though we live in vast, anonymous cities. We still categorize people instantly. Is this person in my group or not? The forms this we-ness takes are varied and powerful. The most obvious is family. The bond between parent and child, between siblings, is the prototype of unity. This is not just a social convention, it is biological. Studies show that when we see a family member in pain, our own brains activate in the same pain regions. We literally feel their suffering. This is why family loyalty is so fierce, and why nepotism, though often condemned, is so persistent. It is a primal urge to favor our own blood. But unity extends far beyond genetics. It can be based on a shared place. Consider the bond between people from the same hometown, the same region, or the same country. When you meet someone abroad who is from your home state, there is an instant connection, a feeling of familiarity and trust that cuts through the stranger danger. This is why ethnic enclaves form in cities around the world. People are drawn to those who share their roots. In business, a car salesman named Ali Reda, of Lebanese descent, built a phenomenally successful career by serving the Arab-American community in his area. He didn't just speak their language, he shared their history, their customs, and their identity. He was not a salesman approaching a customer. He was one of them, offering a service to his own people. This powerful bond, however, has a dark and tragic side. It is the engine of affinity fraud. Con artists know that people let their guard down with those who share their identity. They will join a religious congregation, attend community meetings, and present themselves as fellow believers, as brothers and sisters. Then they will pitch an investment opportunity. The victims do not see a slick salesman. They see a member of their own tribe. The trust is immediate and profound, which is exactly why the fraud is so devastating. The shared identity is a shield that prevents suspicion from ever forming. Unity can also be forged through shared suffering. There is no bond quite like the one formed between people who have endured a traumatic event together. Soldiers who have fought side by side describe a love for their comrades that surpasses almost any other human connection. Survivors of a natural disaster often feel a lifelong kinship with others who were there. This shared adversity creates a we that is almost impossible to penetrate. It can even unite former enemies. When a common threat emerges, a new, larger we can form. Two rival companies may unite against a third. Two warring nations may become allies against a common foe. The perception of a shared enemy is one of the fastest ways to create a sense of unity. Another powerful route to unity is co-creation. When people work together to build something, they become invested in it and in each other. Think of the bond between members of a successful project team, or the fierce loyalty of fans to a band whose music they feel they discovered. This is why companies like IKEA have been so successful with their do-it-yourself model. The customer who assembles their own furniture values it more highly than a pre-assembled piece. They have co-created it. The same principle applies to synchronized action. Marching in a parade, singing in a choir, or even just walking in step with someone creates a feeling of harmony and unity. Studies have shown that people who have walked in synchrony are more likely to cooperate and help each other in subsequent tasks. The physical alignment creates a psychological alignment. The implications of the unity principle for society are profound. It offers a path to bridging the deep divides that separate us. Prejudice and conflict often arise from an exaggerated sense of difference. The solution is not to ignore differences, but to create a larger, more inclusive we. This can be done by focusing on common goals, shared experiences, and overlapping identities. A school that forces students from different backgrounds to compete against each other will only deepen the divide. But a school that puts them on the same team, working together towards a common goal, begins to break down those walls. They start to see each other not as rivals, but as teammates. They become part of the same we. Parents play a crucial role in this. By creating a home environment that is inclusive, by inviting children of different backgrounds for playdates and treating them as part of the family, they are expanding their child's sense of we. They are teaching them at a deep experiential level that the circle of us is wider than they might otherwise think. But the power of unity also carries a responsibility. It can be used to foster unethical behavior within a group. When the we is too tight, members may protect each other from accountability, looking the other way at wrongdoing. For any organization, from a small team to a nation, it is essential to balance the power of unity with a strong, clear ethical code. The goal is to create a we that is not just loyal, but also honorable. A we that can say, "We do not do that here, because we are better than that." Unity, properly channeled, is not just a tool of influence. It is the foundation of community, of cooperation, and of a truly shared humanity. Chapter 9. Instant Influence, Primitive Consent for an Automatic Age. We live in a world that is moving faster than ever before. The amount of information bombarding us daily is staggering. It has been estimated that a single weekday edition of the New York Times contains more information than the average person in the 17th century would encounter in an entire lifetime. Information doubles every few years. Our cognitive capacity, however, has not doubled. It remains what it has always been. This creates a fundamental problem. We cannot possibly process all the information required to make fully informed decisions about every product, every person, and every situation we encounter. We are forced to take shortcuts. We are forced to rely on single, trustworthy pieces of evidence. This is the reality of the automatic age, and it is the context for everything we have learned about influence. The principles we have explored, reciprocation, liking, social proof, authority, scarcity, commitment and consistency, and unity, are not just a list of tricks. They are mental heuristics. They are the shortcuts. They are the modern equivalent of the cheep sound that triggers the mother turkey. In a complex world, they are usually the most efficient way to decide. If an expert says it's good, it probably is. If everyone is buying it, it's probably a safe choice. If someone has done us a favor, we probably owe them one. But this efficiency comes at a cost. When we rely on shortcuts, we become vulnerable to those who would exploit them. We become vulnerable to the profiteers who know how to load the trigger. They create fake experts. They manufacture fake crowds. They give fake gifts to create fake obligations. They counterfeit the very cues we depend on to make good decisions. The modern era, with its relentless pace and information overload, only amplifies this vulnerability. We are busier than ever. We have less time to think. We are more likely to fall back on our automatic responses. This is why the principles of influence are more powerful and more pervasive today than they have ever been. They are the tools we use to navigate the chaos, and they are the tools that are used to manipulate us. So, what is the answer? Should we abandon all shortcuts and try to make every decision through a slow, deliberate, and exhaustive analysis of the facts? This is impossible. We would grind to a halt. We would be unable to function. The answer is not to reject our automatic responses, but to become aware of them. We must learn to recognize when we are being triggered, and we must learn to distinguish between genuine and counterfeit cues. This is the ultimate goal of Cialdini's work. It is not to turn us into cynical, suspicious people who trust no one. It is to empower us. By understanding the principles, we can use them ethically in our own lives. We can become more persuasive parents, more effective leaders, and more successful negotiators. And just as importantly, we can defend ourselves against those who would use these same principles to exploit us. The first line of defense is knowledge. Simply knowing that the because trigger exists can make us pause when someone uses it without a real reason. Knowing about the contrast principle can help us recognize when a salesperson is framing options to manipulate our perception. Knowing about scarcity can help us question whether we truly want an item or whether we just want it because it's the last one. The second line of defense is a healthy dose of vigilance. When we feel ourselves being influenced, we should stop and ask, is this influence legitimate? Is this person truly an expert or just wearing a lab coat? Is this product genuinely popular or are these reviews fake? Is this person doing me a favor or setting a trap? And the third and most powerful line of defense is to be willing to fight back. The proper targets for our anger are not the principles themselves, but the profiteers who falsify them. When we encounter a deceptive ad, a fake review, or a manipulative sales tactic, we should call it out. We should refuse to do business with those who use these tactics. We should warn others. By doing so, we help to preserve the integrity of the shortcuts for everyone. We make it harder for the con artists to operate. We ensure that when we do rely on a shortcut, it is more likely to lead us in the right direction. The stakes are high. In a world of instant communication and global commerce, poor decisions can have immediate and far-reaching consequences. The ability to influence and the ability to resist undue influence are not just social skills, they are essential survival tools. They determine the quality of our relationships, the success of our careers, and the soundness of our choices. Cialdini leaves us with a final thought. The principles of influence are like fire. They can warm your home, or they can burn it down. They can be used to build community and foster cooperation, or they can be used to deceive and exploit. The difference lies in the intent and the awareness of the user. By mastering these principles, by understanding their power and their peril, we can navigate the automatic age with wisdom and integrity. We can give our automatic consent when it is deserved, and we can withhold it when it is not. We can become not just skilled persuaders, but also vigilant guardians of our own autonomy. We can live in the modern world with all its complexity and speed without becoming its unwitting victims.